There are some musicians like AC/DC come up with something new at one point once long ago, and then they're thoroughly happy to just do that one thing until they die. And then there's some of us have a desire to constantly push ourselves into new territory.
If you want to be just dreadfully bored for the rest of your life, that's what you'll do.
If you're not dissatisfied with the way things are, you see no reason to change.
If you want to be continuously delighted, you've got to try different things.
Questioning what you're really about, questioning what your real purpose is. One of my favorite thrills in life is to change my mind.
There is no cure for curiosity.
Picasso got to a style of painting in his teens, 20s, and then in his 30s, he decided to try to push beyond that. Like, wait a second, there's got to be another way.
What everyone thought of as reality out there was in fact not reality out there. It was created in here, in our minds.
The only thing that's true is, there, my hands are clapping right now, that's true. Physical, observable things are true. Everything else is just a perspective that you can choose to take.
Well, hello everyone, it's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops, and I cannot tell you how excited I am about my guest today. I had him booked for earlier in the year, and I had a huge conflict and had to cancel, and I was so bummed out because he's a hard guy to get, but then he thought of me when he had a cancellation, and the universe put us together. My guest today is Derek Sivers. Who I mean, you almost go beyond description, Derek. And I actually thought of this line from Walt Whitman that I'm going to read because it reminded me of you. And the line is this: the past and present wilt. I have filled them, emptied them, and proceed to fill my next fold of future. Do I contradict myself? Fine. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Derek, welcome.
Jim, coming from you, that means a lot. That is such a wonderful quote. I think of it often. So thanks for associating that with me.
Absolutely. And I got to tell you, you just are absolutely beyond intriguing to me because you've been a musician, a circus performer, an entrepreneur, an author. You accidentally started CD Baby to help your friends sell music, turned into this huge online company where you sold, you had 150 musicians, 1,000 musicians that you were selling. You had 100 million in sales. You sold it for 22 million, and then you gave the money away to charity, which, like, wow. But all I have to do is mention you to people. So I mentioned you to my head of Infinite Media, whose online handle is Liberty. His real name is Michael Graham. And I immediately got an email back from him. And he goes, I remember the email I got from him. And then he typed it out from memory. And
Wow.
So he said, the memory, your email, your confirmation email to him was, your CD has gently been taken by CD Baby off the shelves with sterilized, contamination-free gloves. We have lovingly put it on a satin pillow. A team of 50 polished it. And then our packing specialist from Japan lit a candle and did a ceremony. And we all put it in a gold-lined box. The entire company had a celebratory march to the post office, and all of Portland waved goodbye. And your photo has been placed on our best customer wall of the year. I mean, dude, tell me about this. Were you always like this? When you were a kid, was this the way you were? Enlighten me.
Okay, wait, I'm going to rewind a minute first and then answer the question. So
Okay.
I suspect that you and I kind of recognize this in each other because I didn't get the chance to say yet that I am so excited to talk with you. I so admire what you're doing. And I think that
Thank
you
you.
and I have this drive of continuous expansion and improvement that I think of the musical metaphor of AC/DC versus, say, Miles Davis or David Bowie. That there are some musicians like AC/DC that they come up with something new at one point once long ago, and then they're thoroughly happy to just do that one thing until they die. And no desire to grow beyond that. They're like, no, this is my thing. This is what I do. That's that. And then there's some of us, and I'll call this the Miles Davis or David Bowie model, have a desire to constantly push ourselves into new territory. And I'm definitely that way, maybe to a fault. And I sense that you are too, that you also are not resting on your laurels. So I think you and I kind of recognize that kindred thing in us. Agreed? You think?
Totally agreed. And the Miles and David Bowie, I loved. AC/DC, fine. But Miles, Miles and Bowie, resonate with me far, far to a much greater extent.
There are some people that I assumed, because they're so bright, that of course they would keep developing and growing. And it's been really weird and surprising, a little, let's say, confounding to me that some people don't. That no matter how, let's say, brightly they shone in their early days, some just stay at that level of brightness and don't have the desire to go beyond that, which is fine, I guess, for them. It's hard for me to understand that some people would be content to go from, say, 0 to 100 and then just stay at 100 and not push for 1,000. Or anyway, this is a silly metaphor. Okay, so your next question, or your first question is, was I always like this? I think not. I think somewhere along the way in my 20s, I started questioning the things people do and ask, like, why are they doing it that way? Does it have to be that way? What's the real goal here? Is there a better way to get to that goal? Kind of disregarding norms and breaking things down to their lower principles and finding my own way to get to that goal. So in that case, the funny email, yeah, at first, just when I was building the store, cdbaby.com, I quickly put together an email of just like, okay, your CD has been shipped. Thank you. And that was that. And then it just, only about a week or two later, I thought, okay, hold on. That's really boring. Is that all I really want to do, is just provide people with another boring confirmation? I was like, really, the reason I'm doing this is to make people happy. Isn't there another way to make people happy? I think I should give them something a little lively in their inbox. And so that led to that, right? But it's not the correct solution for everything. It doesn't mean that everybody should now go write an email like that. It means questioning what you're really about. Questioning what your real purpose is. So I do this with so many things. I'm a computer programmer too. So many times there is the default way that people do things. There are the current norms. And when I'm learning a new technology, I look at that and then I think, well, wait, the whole point is to launch a server. And I know that Facebook does it this way or Google does it that way, but that's a lot of levels of bureaucracy in between the real point, which is just to get a server going. I think I'm going to skip all of these other layers and just go right to the point. No matter what other people are doing, I don't care if it's not the norm. It gets the job done. So I don't know. It all depends what you're after. I think it's very good for us to question our goals, whether they are pleasure goals, business goals, even personal relationship goals. To look at what you're really after, if you really want to be closer with somebody. Maybe you don't need to go to Fiji to get closer to somebody. Maybe you can just turn off your phone and have a good conversation on the couch, etc.
Totally agree. And I get asked a lot, and so I'm going to ask you because you're probably going to have a better answer. When you had that satori in your 20s, what was there something that you remember that happened that served as a catalyst for you having
Huh.
this new, wait a minute, maybe I should be doing it this way?
Yes. It started with my music teacher, Kimo Williams. Anyone listening to this, I highly recommend you go to the story I wrote about it already, which is I posted it at sive.rs/Kimo, spelled Kimo. Kimo was a music teacher I met randomly when I was 17, just before I was about to go off to college. I was going to Berklee College of Music, and just a month before I went, I met a guy in Chicago who said, "Oh, you're going to Berklee, huh?" He said, "I used to teach at Berklee." He said, "You know what? I think I can help you graduate in 2 years instead of 4. And I think I can do it in the next few weeks. Come by my studio at 9 a.m. tomorrow." So I showed up at 9 a.m. eager to go, and he said he was surprised. Apparently, he often tells people, show up to my studio at 9 a.m., and nobody ever does. But I did. And so he said, "Wow, all right, you're here." So he gave me this crash course in music harmony, jazz harmony, and arranging. And he basically just crammed this information into my brain and sat there with me on the piano bench next to me and was going at this pace instead of the typical university pace. And where he said, basically, universities have to adjust their courses to adapt to the slowest learner in every class. He said, but if you're fast, we can do this much more efficiently. So sure enough, I went to Berklee College of Music a month later, and I tested out of, say, 6 semesters of classes, and I did graduate college in 2.5 years instead of 4, thanks to Kimo Williams. So I think that started me on the path of questioning norms and asking myself, what's the real point here? And is there a more efficient or direct way to do this?
That's fascinating. And the reason I asked is because I according to my parents, who are both in the great beyond now, I was that way from when I was a little kid. And they used to, my mother used to tell me that I would always find the easiest way to do anything. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, just yesterday, do you remember how I asked you to get something out of that bottom cupboard?" I went, "Yeah." And she goes, "The handle's been missing from that cupboard," and the handle's up at our waist level, right? And she goes, for forever, when I want something out of that cupboard, I bend down and pull the cupboard open with my finger or my hand." And she goes, when I asked you to do it, you were like, "Yeah, sure, Mom." And she said, "You walked over, opened it with your toe, and grabbed the thing." And she said, "You just kind of do that naturally." And I kind of thought about that, and I'm like, maybe my superpower is being just incredibly lazy. But then the more I thought about it, the more I think was that I think that some of us have a bit of a rebellious streak, I guess, a streak that like I don't believe in isms. I love Robert Anton Wilson. I don't have any beliefs, but I have many suspicions. And we're going to talk about your view on beliefs later, because I completely agree with you. But so one thing that I do kind of am animated by is like a natural kind of suspicion, maybe, of like, that's the way we've always done it. And I just think that is it's your example of the AC/DC. We figured it out. It's this one way. Now we're just going to keep doing it that. And I just find like, if you want to be just dreadfully bored for the rest of your life, that's what you'll do. If you don't, if you want to be continuously delighted, you've got to try different things. You've got to be willing to fall in your face. You've got to be willing to just make tons of mistakes. And that's kind of my next thing that I wanted to ask you about, because I completely agree with this. And that is, I love making mistakes.
Yeah, hold on, let's not change the subject yet. You've brought up so many interesting things already.
Okay, bring it.
Okay, so you just made me realize instead of AC/DC and Miles Davis, I wonder about like Michelangelo versus Picasso, right? Like you said, Michelangelo kind of like perfected a style of painting early on and then just did that for the rest of his career. Picasso got to a style of painting in his teens, 20s, and then in his 30s, he decided to try to push beyond that. Like, wait a second, there's got to be another way. Okay, so Michelangelo versus Picasso. Lazy. It's so interesting that language has connotations that can be different per language. So it would be interesting to find the definition of the word lazy in many different languages, because in French, I was surprised to find out that the word to expect something, like I'm expecting it to rain today, in French is the same word as to wait. It's attendre, I think. And expect and wait are the same word. And I was so confused when I heard that. And because I was there speaking with a French person. I said, no, those are completely different concepts. Expect means I'm predicting it will happen. And wait is just, I'm just sitting here. And he said, no, these are the same. You know, when you expect something to happen, you are waiting for it to happen. And when you're waiting, you're expecting something because you're waiting. I went, no, those are so different. He said, no, they are the same. So I wonder, lazy, in English, we have a very negative connotation for that. You lazy bum, sloth, right? One of the sins. But I've heard it used for both programmers and musicians, saying in a positive way, I'm very lazy. So a programmer saying, I'm very lazy. I don't write any lines of code that don't need to be there because I'm lazy and I don't want to type anything that doesn't have to exist. And I remember musicians saying, I'm thinking of in particular guitarists saying, I'm very lazy. The less movement I do with my fingers, the better. I don't sweep my hand around with the pick. I just only go to the string, to the minimum necessary. And that's why some guitarists were so much faster or more seemingly more agile than others, is because they were lazy. So that's using this word, it's almost like we need a better word for it, or, we're going to Viva la Revolution, we'll rebrand lazy as a positive thing. But it's interesting.
You got my vote.
It's interesting that your mother noticed that. And again, I really like that you said lazy is a superpower. I really think that we should reconsider this word and think of it as positive. Same as the word selfish. I think the word selfish can be a very positive thing. That's showing some self-worth or self-valuing. Same thing with smug. Smug is another one we think of negative, but to me, I feel smug when I feel like I'm living in alignment with my values. Like I feel really good about myself. Like, I just did I woke up and I lifted weights first thing in the morning instead of waiting till you do it begrudgingly in the afternoon. I ate really healthy today. I feel really smug. But that's a good thing. It means I'm living in anyway, I think there are a few, those are the three I've identified. Lazy, selfish, and smug, I think are all positive.
I couldn't agree more. It reminds me of Bertrand Russell's, the use of language. I persevere. He is pig-headed, and they just using the various different definitions. And then I also think of I can't remember whose line it is. I think it was Wittgenstein, maybe not, but the limits of my language are the limits of my world.
I think that was him.
Yeah. And so I'm fascinated by language just like you are, because when you read for example, I'm a huge fan of the Tao Te Ching, which is Lao Tzu, And another one of my loves is one of yours, Stoicism. I kind of mash those two together, and I think they make a pretty good user guide, so to speak. But when you're reading, like, so I started reading the Tao Te Ching when I was 18 years old. And then I started to finally understand it when I was in my mid 50s. And the way it normally gets translated, the Tao, is the way, okay, or the path. And I was reading a new translation, and I was delighted because this translator chose to use the term the process.
Ooh.
And I loved that because I always want to live my life like a verb, not like a noun. And the process to me seemed more like, okay, this is something that's moving, right? The path can just be a path, a single path. The way, that means there aren't other ways, right? But process means movement, means exploration, means all of these things that are much more active. And so I love the idea around, starting a new language movement. Another thing that I think you and I really share, and you as usual put it better than I do. Ideas are worthless unless you execute against them. What I often say is an idea without action is a daydream. And like, sure, enjoy your daydreams, sit on your couch, have your ideas. If they're not put out into the world, in my way of looking at life, it's a pleasant dream, but it doesn't nothing really happen. And you say something, they're just multipliers, which I really like. I like that idea. And I'm going to be stealing that from you going forward. And execution is worth millions. Talk about that, because sure. I love the way you talk about that.
Oh, first I should say it was a reaction against somebody that came to me, introduced by a mutual friend, saying, I really want you to meet this guy. I really think that you two need to meet. He's got something he wants to show you. And I thought, okay. So now I'm a little socially obliged. So I meet the guy. He said, okay, Derek, I've got this idea, but I can't tell you the idea until you sign this non-disclosure agreement. I went, ugh. And again, it's like ordinarily I would have said no, but it was like a good friend that introduced us. So I had this kind of social obligation, like, all right, there. All right, go ahead. Tell me your idea. And this is before I had this, idea times a multiplier thing. And he said, okay, here's my idea. Online dating with music. And I said, uh-huh. And he goes, yeah, dude, online dating with music. And I said, yeah, go ahead. He goes, that's it. That's the idea. So I figure that, you can, you're a programmer. You can make this thing happen. I'm the idea guy. I give you the idea. You go make it happen. 50-50. And I said, wait, is there any more to this idea? And he goes, no, dude, online dating with music. I went, okay, all right, hold on a second. I said, look, those 4 words are that alone is not worth 50%. I said, it's the make anybody can say online dating with music. Remember the movie, There's Something About Mary, right? 6-minute abs, 5-minute abs, whatever. Anybody can say that. I said, the hard part is going to make it happen. And I said, you can actually have a bad idea and make a great company from it. Or you can have a great idea and just sit there and hold meetings saying online dating with music, and it's not worth a damn thing. I guess I'll pay for this, our Diet Cokes. So, yeah, then I thought later that night about how annoyed I was, and I wrote up an article that's at sive.rs/multiply, where I kind of put it into a grid. I said, let's say a great idea is a No, sorry. Let's say a terrible idea is a -1, an okay idea is a 1, a good idea is a 10, a great idea is 100, and an amazing idea is 1,000. I said, but terrible execution, let's say, is a -$1, and no execution is 0, and good execution is a 10, or maybe bad execution is a 10. Anyway, I list these numbers and I say, to make a business, you need to multiply those two. So you can have an okay idea with great execution and do well, or a great idea with no execution and it's worth nothing. So that's the idea. It's one of those things I thought of in a few minutes and wrote it up in 20 minutes, and I'm glad that it's traveled very far.
It's so funny because it seems so simple. I am a journal keeper, and I'm in the process of getting them all machine readable so that I can have Sim Jim AI explain myself to me. And so I was going through one of my old journals. For people who are not watching but listening, I'm holding up one of my old journals here, and I found this thing that I wrote when I was a kid, in my 20s, and it was energy mind times energy action times energy random squared, because lots of random shit happens in the world, equals result. And if you just look at it as a formula, if you've got the best idea, let's give it a rank of 1,000,000. It's the best idea in the entire world that's anyone has ever come up with. And your energy of action equals 0. 0. That's what you get. Yeah. And it just seems to me to be such a truism. And yet we get people asking you to sign an NDA for online dating with music. I used to joke that the only reason you should either require an NDA, if you're the one asking for one, or sign one, is to make absolutely certain that people tell everyone about what they've signed the NDA about.
Nice.
So, how do you think you would help somebody get from this idea that, they want you to sign an NDA for online dating with music to moving toward, like, if you were a coach, right? And a young person came up and they're like, Derek, I love you, are amazing. I read all your books. This is fantastic. What you've done, what you've achieved, my God, the variety of stuff in your life. But like, how do I move from like this abstract thought that I'm having to action, iteration, doing it? I mean, can you coach that into it? Can you teach that to a person?
Yeah, that's a lot of what life coaches do, or personal coaches or business coaches or whatever. Coach's job is to take your blah, blah, blah and turn it into observable action, or what do you want to call that? Deliverables or whatever. Milestones. So the first thing is, if somebody declares some intention, to say, okay, well, what actions would you take to make that happen? So in the case of a business idea, right, like online dating with music, I'd say, okay, take action on this right away. So action, you could think that would mean like registering the domain name, but I'd say, no, don't do that yet. Do something that's actually useful for this idea. Say, talk to a real person. It helps to do it with real people, so you don't stay in the land of abstract for too long. No matter how big your idea, you can get it going with one person right now. So online dating with music, you can pick one person that you know is single and another person that you know is single, and ask them what kind of music they like and write it down. And then say, would you also like somebody if you knew was also into Miles Davis, whatever, right, John Coltrane? And you could just test the idea with a piece of paper, no technology, no programming, No domain name, no, incorporating an LLC. Uh, just begin by talking to real people and get the idea going that way. And I believe that if you just start doing that kind of action immediately, and you do that for 90 days, for example, you will be so much farther ahead in 90 days than somebody else who took action and just started programming a database table or setting up an LLC and calling lawyers and opening bank accounts and whatnot. If you begin by talking to real people and test things in the real world with real people, you'll get so much farther than anything else.
Could not agree more. When we were designing something at my old firm that we sold, it was an online ability, gave investment advisors the ability to create custom portfolios for their clients. And we thought, oh, this is cool. This is like, I tried it way long ago at a company called Netfolio in 2000. Tech didn't work, .com. But anyway, we kept working on it. And then we kind of came up with this list. And several of my colleagues were like, okay, so we're going to prioritize all these and then we're going to start building against them. And I'm like, no, we're not. And my son had talked to me about talking to people. And the best advice that he got was don't do anything until you get 12 advisors actually in a room and ask them, do you want this or that? Do you like this or that? A/B test. And like, you could see some of my colleagues like, well, look, that's crazy. That's a waste of time. And of course, that's the way we did it. And Derek, everything we would have thought would have been at the top of what they, their wish list. Guess where it was? If it was even on the list, it was at the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
And so this idea of asking real people, what a wild concept. And yet we have this idea that like we should do it the other way. And so much of business gets done the other way. And it just seems to me to be completely backwards, right? It's like the same sort of story when we were setting up O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. The president of my company said, we got to decide on the trading systems. And I looked at him and I went, Chris, we don't decide on trading systems. We don't trade. We'll make a horrible decision. What we're going to do is push it down to the people who actually do the trading, and we're going to use the systems that they want to use. And it seems to me that, like, C.P. Snow's The Two Cultures, Art and Science. Have you read that book?
No.
Yeah, it's good. You'd like it, I think. Because what he talks about is this kind of split that happened. It kind of, you could even say the left hemisphere and right hemisphere of the brain, right? They used to be kind of co-joined, and then we had this split where the analytical was over here and the imagination was over here. And they stopped doing what you just recommended. And it seems to me they let, and we just got pitched on somebody who's starting a company that's trying to remerge the people who do the design in manufacturing. I didn't know this. They're split. So over here, there are the designers, and they use computers to design everything. But then it has to go into a work order, which shows the people who are actually building it how they want it done. Well, you can guess what will happen here, right? Is like they don't speak the same language.
Yeah.
And so they get it here and they're all like, no, that doesn't work. We actually build these things and you're missing steps A, B, C, D, and E. Right? And so my next question becomes...
Wait, actually, so to apply that to your previous point, it's important to ask the right people. If you've got a new business idea, you don't necessarily go to the banker and say, what do you think of this online dating with music? You talk to single people
yes.
that are looking to not be single. Or every now and then somebody pitches me on a new music startup saying, hey, here's a thing musicians could use. What do you think? And I always have the same answer, which is it doesn't matter what I think. I'm not a musician looking to promote my music anymore. You need to talk to real musicians looking to promote their music because I have no idea their needs. And they think, yeah, but I want to get the VIP opinion. But the VIP opinion should trail what the real customers and users feel. So yeah, I think you need to talk to the right people, like you say, with the builder versus the designer.
I love that because that's the other thing. This default to authority. And by the way, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have experts. We should. I don't want somebody off the street to come do brain surgery on me. Okay, so I definitely want the person who knows how to do that. But the default to the VIP, the default to it's the bandwagon effect. Really, it's kind of like, whoa, he's got a good idea. Let's jump on there and let's ask him. And maybe we're asking the wrong person entirely, right? And I love that observation because if you want to find pain points, find them with the people who are going to potentially use the product, right? Single people in the case of the online dating, engineers in the case of the people building things. And it just seems to me that that's such a straightforward and simple concept. One of the things that you write and talk about is, the idea to get going, start iterating, just do that and just keep the iteration going. And I wonder, do you think it's possible to build a team that's, working together closely, not separated, like I just said about the engineer and the designers over here? But do you think it could work if there were the idea people and they were cheek by jowl with the execution people? Or do you think it has to reside in one person?
Ooh. There is a benefit to being a purely idea person because I think the executor of the idea can trail a bit. That I think that an idea person could say, I know you usually do it this way, but what about that? And even if the executor would say, what? No, that's crazy. That's stupid. No. But after sleeping on it, they might go, oh, actually, wait, I think you might be onto something. Nobody else does it this way, but that could work. So in a way, I think it can be useful to be a bit naive.
I agree. I think that cognitive diversity is something that people don't pay close enough attention to because people think differently. They have different strengths. They have different weaknesses. Somebody who's great at ideas is necessarily probably going to think very differently than somebody who's really great at execution, right? If you're looking at companies, right, everyone talks about, you want, like Peter Thiel, you want 0 to 1, right? That's where all the value resides. Yes and no. 1 to 100 can build a lot of value as well, if that's your goal, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think is important is cognitive diversity. And if you have that, you necessarily get access to another brain that doesn't think the way you think. And that can lead to really great combinatorial ideas and execution, right? Because I also believe that the execution person can learn from the idea person. In other words, about how to better execute, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea person, conversely, is going to say, well, that's an interesting idea, but let me tell you why that's going to be really hard for us to execute. And then the idea person okay, you know what? And so it's kind of like, I loved your story about how John Lennon met Yoko Ono, who my nephew works for her, and I've met her many times. She's an amazing woman. And the story, for those that don't know it, is John Lennon, and I didn't know this story, and I learned it from researching you. John Lennon went to an art a gallery and saw this ladder. And being John Lennon, he climbed the ladder and he found a magnifying glass, and it said yes. Right? Was that what it said?
Yeah.
Yes. And then you told the story about running or catching up with an old girlfriend. And she told you said that you were still single, even though she was happily married. And her response was so delightful, which was just keep climbing the ladder.
Yeah.
So you can learn things from a variety of perspectives, which kind of leads me into your idea about beliefs, the book you wrote about beliefs. And
I'm still writing it right now. That's the one I'm currently working on.
Yeah. But one of the things that you said that I read was that sometimes you believe something even though it's not true. And I was reminded of that really resonates with me, because don't get crazy about searching for the ultimate meaning. Look for use. Right? Is this useful to me or not? Right? And like George Box famously said, all models are wrong. Some are useful. Ooh. And Ptolemy, Ptolemy was entirely wrong about astronomy, and almost entirely, and yet incredibly useful for the early seafarers who were using his astronomical system to navigate the oceans, right? So I think that one of the things that I took from you when I was reading about it, and I'd like you to expand upon, is like, why is that a controversial idea at all?
For one, I think when people say, I believe, ... whatever follows that, they believe it's just a fact.
Yeah.
But I believe that that anytime you say, I believe, whatever follows that is not necessarily true. That's why you have to say, I believe. You don't say, I believe this apple is on the counter right now when you're standing there looking at it. Right. You just say, the apple's on the counter. You don't say, I believe that I'm 53 years old. You say, no, I'm 53 years old. So I believe tends to mean that you are staking your stance on something that's debatable. And I like to reframe anything debatable as not necessarily true. Because if it's not necessarily true, and by that I mean inarguably, absolutely, observably, objectively, repeatedly, and according to any perspective, including an ant or an alien, only in all of those conditions will I consider something to be absolutely true. Which means that almost nothing is absolutely true, especially not all the social stuff we say every day. Like this person is a bad president, or the world is flat. No, okay, sorry, that's like a physical reality. Let me not do that one. I accidentally got mixed in with, the people that spout opinions as if facts. This country's going to hell. This government's doing a bad job, etc. They're all spoken as facts, and the person saying it usually thinks it's a fact. But if you can poke any hole in it or say that any perspective in the universe could be otherwise, well, then it's not an absolutely, necessarily, observably, objectively, repeatedly true fact. So once you define something as not true, well, then your creative agency can kick in. Your ability to negotiate life and challenge situations and choose a perspective that empowers you. Because ultimately, most of what we care about is our ability to do something or at least feel happy or tranquil about something, right? So it's mostly about actions, but sometimes, say if something's in the past, maybe what you need to do is just come to peace with it. So if something has already happened, you can choose a perspective or a quote-unquote belief that says, that was wrong. That person wronged me. What they did was bad, and I am mad. And that perspective is one that you could choose, but it's going to make you upset. And you could choose another perspective that says, that person was doing the best they could with what they had. They thought they were doing the right thing. And where it gets interesting is even that is not necessarily true. That person might have actually done something intentionally ill-willed, but you choosing to believe that they were doing the best they could and they meant well will make you feel better, since it's something in the past that you can't do anything about anyway. But more importantly are the things that we can do something about, where your choice to believe one thing versus another can mean the difference between you feeling helpless and resigned and plopping down in bed just feeling angry and stewing, typing nasty comments into social media, versus feeling empowered, feeling powerful, and doing something about it. And all of this just goes on in your head. All of this is just the perspective that you're choosing to take. And I think if we let go of this idea of true, saying it's just true that this government is bad, it's just true that I would be happier if I lived across the world somewhere. If you let go of all of that and say, no, none of that is true. The only thing that's true is, there, my hands are clapping right now. That's true. Physical, observable things are true. Everything else is just a perspective that you can choose to take. Then the way to judge it, if we let go of the word true, is whether this is useful to me or not.
Perfectly said, because I wrote a piece or did a series of threads on Twitter called The Thinker and the Prover. And I was borrowing from Robert Orr, who I borrowed from Robert Anton Wilson, derivative all the way down. But I thought it very useful, because what it says is basically the thinker can think anything it wants, right? Like the queen in Alice in Wonderland, it can believe 3 impossible or 6 impossible things before breakfast. But the minute the thinker stops thinking, the prover takes over. And the prover makes that belief true for you. And what it does, if you want to talk about it scientifically, it's like they call it the reticular activating system. And for example, if you want to do an experiment, this is actually fun. Think of something you don't see very often. In the case when I was doing this experiment on myself, I thought to myself, I don't see green cars very often. I just don't see green cars. And so I wrote down, I'm going to look for green cars. And then I wrote down, I think over the next 2 days that I will see 5 green cars, right? You know how many I saw? 49.
No way. Wow.
And the reason was because I turned on my reticular activating system. And my prover said, okay, we're going to find green cars today. That's the job today. And so
nice example.
The example of true, that, and we're back to language, right? And what words can mean to people. True to people means fact, means indisputable, means only correct answer, right? That's true. And generally speaking, very little that we say or do or believe is true.
Yeah.
Then if you can understand that, and that you can understand that it's my opinion, that doesn't make it true, right? then you're open to looking for useful beliefs that can get you where you want to go. So my next question for you is, what beliefs of yours now are you leaning on to make your life a more pleasant or directionally superior experience to before you embrace those beliefs?
Wow. They're tough to identify because you often don't even realize that you're choosing them. Off the top of my head, this is going to sound weird, but I was on my computer programming up until just a minute before we started this phone call. So I'm sorry, that's just what's on my mind right now.
That's fine.
But I take an approach to computer programming that always looks for the absolute minimum lines of code necessary, the minimum complicated dependencies, the minimum number of dependencies necessary. So I don't want to include 19 JavaScript libraries to do something that I could do with a shell script, even if including 19 JavaScript libraries could mean I only need to type 10 lines of code, and a shell script means I have to type 50 lines of code. Well, technically, typing 50 lines of code is the simpler solution because it has less dependencies. Simple and complex are misunderstood words. The word complex is an adjective describing the verb complect, which means to braid things together. When things are braided together with other things, they are complected, and therefore they are complex. And simple is a version of simplex, which means unbraided, not connected to other things. And we mistake those for hard and easy because it can be very hard to make something simple that has less dependencies, that's not complected with other things. And it can be very, very easy to make something complex, especially with computers. You can just type install WordPress, and it will install millions of lines of complicated code. Or you can write your own blog from scratch with no dependencies, and it will be harder, but objectively it's simpler. So anyway, a current belief in my programming is that I believe, for me, it's more important to be simple, even if that's harder. See what I mean? That was a trivial one, but sorry, that's the one on my mind right now.
No, it's not trivial. It makes the point nicely. And I love the differentiation between simple and complex, because I think that's another bug in our human OS. I think that we are sort of designed to think the complex is going to be, the more correct answer. In fact, I wrote an entire piece about this, about a thing. It takes too long to tell the entire story, but the punchline is that one person was using a very simple way to determine if something was a yes or a no, right? And the other person, and he was getting the correct feedback on his guesses. So he was soon getting like all of them right with his very simple approach. This person over here was given incorrect feedback. His feedback was based on this guy's guesses. And so his methodology, when described, necessarily was very complex. He had to weave this great tapestry of sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that. And, and the thing that was amazing from this study was that the guy who was getting them all right with the simple solutions was in awe of this other guy and felt that his own pedestrian explanations were horrible, right? And so we're kind of trained to like think that the complex is smarter or more complete. And yet I find the exact opposite. I find that a real superpower is the ability to take something that might be complex and make it simple in terms of use, in terms of understanding, in terms of all of those things. And I think it was Charles Mingus, the musician. His son was an artist, and he showed him some of his work, and it was abstract. And Mingus looked at it, and he went, "Go and learn how to draw an apple." And his son was, "What do you mean? This is my art." And he goes, "No, no, no, no. Learn how to do a drawing of an apple that looks like a fucking apple, and then you can play Picasso, and you can do the bull that Steve Jobs embraced, right? The first you show the Picasso bull that it's just a bull, and then you just are the lines at the end of Picasso's. And that was his journey, right? And so I think that that's a very empowering belief, because not only, it doesn't apply just to programming. It applies to a lot of things. It can apply to if you're writing something out, if you're writing a story, if you're doing any of those kinds of things, right?
Yeah. Okay, Jim, I just realized, so your listeners might have a bit of a financial bent because of your past. I was actually just asking myself this yesterday when it comes to the infrastructure of my personal finance, that I could value simplicity and say I could just have everything in one bank account. And then I started to think about the trade-off between simplicity and safety, going, ooh, in a way, what I'm defining as simple could make me more fragile, because if something happened to that one bank, or if somebody hacked that one account, everything's gone. So, should I separate things into 2 accounts? Well, if I'm doing that, maybe separate things into 4 accounts. But oh my God, I've just made something very complex. But maybe is that safer? I don't know. Where do you fall on that when it comes to financial things?
So there's a great quote that is that there are 2 schools of investing thought. The first school is, don't keep all your eggs in one basket. In other words, diversify. Make sure that you have a well-diversified portfolio, or in your case, you have multiple banks. So if one fails, you have all the other ones as backups. And then the other school of thought is, no. Keep all of your eggs in one basket, but watch that basket very closely.
Right. Okay.
And so they're equally applicable depending on the person. That is ultimately what it comes down to. What type of person are you trying to help? If, in my case, now I put my investment advisory hat on here, which I haven't had on for a while. And so what I would do is ask a series of questions to determine, who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with somebody who just really values that simplicity and therefore is going to get this much more simple plan, but then we're going to have to watch it really, really closely and have to explain to them that, okay, it's simple, but not necessarily easy. Or are we going to say they're the type of person who we're going to give a widely diversified portfolio of different asset classes and everything? And typically one rising, the other fall. That's the correlation between things. But, when you have a financial crisis, guess what happens? All correlations go to 1. And everything, it's baby bathwater time. So it becomes, to me, we all have unique irises. We all have unique fingerprints. And yet that doesn't stop us from saying, okay, so here are some general guidelines that are good. Then you got to match it to the person. Then you've got to say, because ultimately, Derek, what I've found in investing is the point of failure is the human. Remember the Pogo cartoon? Remember the Pogo cartoon? We've met the enemy and it's us. Right.
Yeah.
And that is so true. It is just so true. And generally speaking, we are the point of failure. And generally speaking, it is usually an emotional or volatile time where we make a bad choice. And again, that's human OS. That's the way we're designed. And so to try to help people it can't all be intellectual. My friend Jason Zweig, who writes for the Wall Street Journal, he has a great metaphor for this. He goes, the difference between intellectually understanding that your portfolio could go down 50%, and then actually experiencing it in real life is the same as showing a person a picture of a snake and then throwing a snake in their lap.
Nice. Good one. I like that.
So
it's so interesting. By the way, to get meta for a second, I hope that your listeners find this useful. A thing that I try to remember to do and I sometimes forget to do is when you ask me a question about me, if I'm being a good interviewee, I should actually answer it on behalf of the listener in a way, like something that the listener would find useful. So in a way, I think I kind of failed myself when I talked about this very specific programming thing that probably almost nobody listening can relate to. And so I hope that we rescued it a bit with that financial one. I love that you brought up that, one thing, but watch that one thing very carefully. I had heard that quote, but like 10 years ago, and I'd forgotten it. So thank you for that. And this idea of simplicity even applied to relationships. Again, we may think that simplicity is a good thing, but if you're following that to its logical conclusion with relationships, that would mean that you only have one relationship, or maybe none would be the ultimate conclusion. And we don't want that. So in some ways in life, we want the complexity of many friends, many connections. The warm cocoon embrace of having so many friends and loved ones around. But let's admit it, that's very complex. That's almost the most complex thing in the world is your relationships with other people. But yet we like that complexity. It's really interesting to think of simple versus complex as detaching them from ideas of easy and hard and good and bad. They're not correlated.
And that's a great example. There is not a one size fit all for anything, right? Like we're both into Stoicism, for example. Stoicism is really useful because, at least for me, the core understanding that I take away from Stoicism is it is not the event, it is my reaction to the event that determines my state of mind, right? And so I also kind of extrapolate it to your either outer oriented or inner oriented. And I find I'm inner oriented. In other words, even though I get a 98 on the Big Five on extroversion, I've trained myself to understand that no. It's not that person's fault. It's mine. Like if I react really badly to, let's say you told me to like, hey Jim, I hate your podcast. I listened to it once. It's awful. You're dumb. You're stupid. I don't want to talk to you. I could say, that Derek is an awful, horrible person. Or I could say, I guess he just doesn't vibe with the way I do things. And that's fine. He's different than I am. One reaction is going to have me wallowing, right? And oh my God, I really love Derek and I read all of his stuff and he hates me and now I'm a failure. Or like, yeah, he's just not into me. Who's controlling that reaction? Me.
Yeah.
And if you get that, that's the only way, in my opinion, where you can act with high agency, right? And I know you've written quite a bit about agency and like I read all these people like, free will is a myth. And here's why. And I don't spend a minute of time thinking about that. Why do I not do that? Well, first off, you can't design, at least now, you can't design an experiment that, now we're getting back to true and false, right? You can't design an experiment that proves, like the sun is up, right, that there is no free will or that there is free will. And so since that, it's like the Middle Ages where the theologians would argue how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. right? Like, that's a waste of time. And so instead of thinking about free will versus no free will, I choose to believe that I have free will because guess what? My outcomes get a lot better when I have free will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I choose to have agency because guess what? All of my outcomes are much better when I accept the agency. Now, a lot
Yeah.
of people don't want to accept agency because they want to blame somebody else. And you have a really interesting, you've written about this somewhat extensively. Talk to me a bit about that. But answer, by the way, I think you were wrong about answering like I should answer on behalf of the
Okay.
audience. No. They want to hear you. They want to hear
Hmm.
this whole thing. The only reason I do this podcast is because I wanted it to be a series of interesting conversations with super interesting people. Like, because I always like you've been in a restaurant or a bar, right? When you sit next to the table, and there's a movie even, My Dinner with Andre, which
Mhm.
when I finally got convinced to do this podcast, I'm like, okay, but it's got to be My Dinner with Andre. Like, it's got to be fly
Nice.
on the wall, listening to these guys having a cool conversation.
Okay, good comparison. Okay. Um, okay, so agency. Yeah, you and I have that in common. Uh, when I sold my company, to the outside world, it looked like a success. But to me, it was a personal failure because I wanted to run that company forever. And after 10 years, I had mismanaged it so bad. Wait, I'm sorry. Reverse that. After 10 years, those jerks that worked for me were so evil. They were terrible. Those assholes tried to kick me out of my own company. I was just surrounded by idiots, so I had to sell. No, okay, so that's truly how I felt for the first year or two after selling. Um, After a year or two, I realized that that is a mindset that makes me weaker. A mindset that makes me stronger is to admit that I mismanaged things, that they were just playing their inevitable role in a situation that I created, that I could have done things better. Or let's just say I messed up and that's why they acted the way they did. That to me is a way more empowering mindset, and in a way actually gives me more tranquility at the same time. Because if I think that they were jerks, then I can just stay mad forever. If I think that they were just playing their inevitable part in the situation I created, I can forgive myself. I can say, all right, I messed up. I will feel the pain from that mistake and aim to not do that again. But let's just say for anybody listening that what I've just said is not necessarily the right and true way to think about things. This is a way that worked for me. There are some people who were raised with or by parents that filled them with guilt. And they have a terrible time feeling that everything is their fault. And those people might actually find it more useful to believe that some things are not their fault. And that might be the more empowering mindset for them. So let's just say anytime we're talking about mindsets, please always know that there is no right or wrong, no matter who's saying this worked for me, or even if somebody says this is the right way to think about it, what they're really saying is this works for me. So yes, believing everything is my fault, that works for me.
And for me, and one of the things that I always kind of scout for is directionally speaking, when I find intriguing people such as yourself, they do have some things in common. And one of the things that they have in common is a sense of high agency.
Yeah.
And so I do appreciate your caveat though, because I think you're right. For many things in life, for people who are actively trying to get better or be happier, I don't care, fill in the blank. What you have to do is you have to investigate as best you can the various ways, you could do something. And
Yeah.
then find the thing that resonates with you. Because honestly, you're not going to do it if it doesn't resonate with you, right?
Yeah.
This expert said that I have to follow this diet and do this
Right.
specific kind of exercise,
Yep.
and that's what I'm going to do. And it's something that you hate, and then you just never do it, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to continually look until you find that click in that is like, I can do this.
Yeah.
This is something that I think I can stick with. Because honestly, persistence is another thing that I think, one of the things that, as I was preparing for chatting with you, that I just love about you is you do look at things from so many different angles, which is something that I really, really admire. And Robert Anton Wilson is somebody I love. I've read all of his stuff. He was 50 years ahead of his time. And he took up the term that I think Tim Leary came up with, which was reality tunnels. And he makes the point in his work that we all have different reality tunnels. We don't have the same exact nervous systems, right? And we don't have exactly the same minds, right? And he proves it in a variety of ways, like having 30 people in a class he taught, sketch the hallway on your way to the classroom. And guess what? All 30 sketches are different. And then when you really understand this and you try to put yourself into a different person's reality tunnel, your aperture opens up so much more widely, because you're like, oh, well, of course, if I actually believed this, right? And, it's easiest to do in either religion or politics, and put yourself in the reality tunnel of somebody who is espousing things that you disagree with, right? And by doing it, you can immediately understand a little bit better, not only yourself, but that other person as well, right? And when you put it in those kinds of terms, your advice resonates, right? Because you're right. Well, you and I are very high agency believers and acting with that. You were probably smart to say, by the way, if you were raised to be guilty, shame, remember Game of Thrones, shame with the bell. That's not going to work for you. But
Yeah.
what do you think? Do you think that are these things teachable?
Oof. I mean, teachable, yeah. I mean, you and I learned them. We're sitting here talking about them. Yes, to somebody who's interested. Again, let's go all the way back to AC/DC, aka Michelangelo, who says, "I'm good at what I do. I'm not looking to be different than what I am. I'm happy with who I am. I'm not looking to change my perspective." Versus Picasso, Miles Davis, who says, "Okay, I did that. Now what's next?" Okay, so maybe it's a type of personality that's open to wanting new perspectives. I'm personally obsessed with it, and I didn't even realize how much I'm obsessed with it until just a few days ago, when somebody was asking for my recommendation for a book on understanding another perspective. And I said, "Oh, sure, yeah, you should look at the time paradox, which helps you understand people who have a different perspective on time." I said, "Oh, but you should also consider the geography of bliss, which helps you understand, the Prisoners of Geography, I think it was called, which helps you understand how geography can shape philosophy. That people that grow up in mountainous places or cultures that developed in mountainous places have a very different culture than cultures that developed on the plains, versus ones that were, in the cold versus in the temperate equatorial zones. And I said, but you should also understand someone with countries. I said, you must read Au Contraire, Figuring Out the French. I said, it's the best book on a single country's culture. I said, and Watching the English is the second best book on that subject. And then I named a few more, and I said, and you should also read and suddenly I listed out, I think, something like 8 more books on the subject. And I went back and I looked, I went, oh my God, I've read like almost 20 books on the subject of understanding other people's perspective. I went, wow, no wonder I think this way. I mean, how many time does it take to read a book? Right? 5 to 10 hours or something like that? Oh my God, I've probably spent at least 200 hours just reading other people's thoughts on understanding other people's perspective on the world. And I was like, wow, I think I'm really obsessed with this subject. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? Because I seek out people who are incredibly insatiably curious, right? And because to me, that's a great marker for a lot of other things. People who are like just, I think of Dorothy Parker's line, curiosity is the cure for boredom. There is no cure for curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity. And then I add in Stephen Wright, the comedian's curiosity killed the cat, but for a while I was a suspect.
Nice.
but so I do find that there are these kind of like, there are some markers, if you will, whereby, an intensely, insatiably curious person is going to have other characteristics as well, usually. And it's this idea of like trying to come up with a way that this could be taught. Because people like come to me and they're like, how do you know all this stuff? Or, well, why are you interested in that? And how can I do that? And if you got any advice there, I would love to hear it.
I just had the idea that maybe this starts with realizing that you are not right. That all of the things you think of as true and right are just one way of looking at things. It might start with that. If we can help people understand that they are not right.
I love that. Because the only way, if you look at Claude Shannon and information theory, right? Information is that which surprises you. So in a poem can be densely information rich. A political speech, zero information, because you're not surprised, right? And so when do we learn? When we're wrong. That's when we learn. And one of my founders in one of our portfolio companies says, I always try to make novel mistakes.
But Jim, I might have to take it back. I think the thing I just said about realizing that you're not right has to come after another step, which is people valuing the very idea of learning and growing. Because let's go back again to Michelangelo AC/DC. You might believe that, nope, I do not want to learn any new things. I see no value in it. I am Michelangelo. I have arrived. I am the best there ever was, and there ever will be. I have perfected my style. I have no desire to change. A lot of people believe that on a, let's call it a more pedestrian level, that like, no, I'm good. This is me. This is who I am. This is where I live. This is how I like my eggs. This is it. I'm good. And somebody comes along saying, hey, I've got a way that you could be different or better. And they're like, nope, I'm good. So I think it has to start with that before anything else. But you know what? I have a proposal. I would love to split this conversation into half. I have loved this subject so much. I got to tell you, if you don't mind me praising you on air,
Flattery will get you everywhere.
I do a podcast like this every week. I'm a guest on someone's podcast every week. And I think this is the most times I've ever wanted to interrupt to write down something the host has said. You mentioned so many things that I'm going to beg you for a copy of this recording as soon as we're done. But also there are so many things that I want to, let's keep talking about this. Shall we break this into 2 parts?
Done. Let's start it. Let's start at 2 and then maybe see if we iterate. It might even go beyond 2.
Yes. All right. Audience, we will see you again. My name's Derek Sivers. Nice to meet you.
Jim
Go to my website.
Intermission right now because we're coming back for part 2 soon.